Africa did not slip from France's hands because of Russia. Africa itself chose to rise, to snap the chains of dependency. That is the thunder hidden beneath polished speeches and media headlines. For decades, Paris drained billions in profit while African streets remained in poverty. Today, as Western leaders rush to blame Moscow, the deeper reality is clear. A continent has awakened, daring to stand on its own. But what secrets are being kept behind closed doors of power? Why does the West fear this shift more than admitting its own failures? And could this be the first sunrise of a new African century? A storm is rising from the Sahel, and it carries not dust but defiance. From Bamako to Ouagadougou, the cry is the same. Africa will no longer be dictated to. In this wave of awakening, Captain Ibrahim Traore stands as a symbol of courage and dignity, echoing through villages and capitals alike. For the first time in decades, African nations are not following. They are writing their own script. Billions of US dollars once leaving the continent are now being redirected to schools, farms, and industries. But here lies the question, is this awakening unstoppable, or will old powers attempt to silence it? The unraveling of France's dominance in Africa did not happen overnight. It unfolded step by step, like cracks spreading through a wall too long ignored. Paris, under President Emmanuel Macron, promised a new chapter in Franco-African relations, but the words rang hollow against the weight of reality. In Mali, where 5,000 French troops were stationed, insecurity rose by nearly 40%, and the very mission to curb extremism failed to deliver safety. Hope turned into frustration, and frustration into rejection. By 2022, Burkina Faso delivered its breaking point. Captain Ibrahim Traore rose after the loss of more than 3,000 civilians and the displacement of nearly 2 million people, a tragedy that exposed the futility of external military presence. The government expelled 400 French soldiers, a symbolic act that signaled sovereignty could no longer be outsourced. Then came Niger in 2023, the jewel of France's uranium supply, providing nearly 40% of the fuel for French nuclear plants. Yet paradoxically, 80% of Nigerians lived without access to electricity. When 1,500 French troops were asked to leave, the message echoed across the Sahel: resources can no longer justify exploitation. Each exit was not just a military withdrawal, it was a vote of no confidence, a declaration that Africa is capable of charting its own path. But the critical question remains, will this gradual collapse of influence lead to Africa's true independence, or will it invite new powers to step into the vacuum left behind? The collapse of French influence across Africa reached a painful climax when President Emmanuel Macron, standing before cameras, accused Russia and Wagner of poisoning the minds of Africans. It was not a speech of confidence but of desperation, a leader searching for excuses as the ground slipped away. Macron's words revealed a deeper wound. Paris could no longer explain why billions of dollars in African gold, uranium, and cocoa had enriched France while leaving African families in poverty. Moscow's response was as sharp as it was symbolic. Vladimir Putin dismissed the accusation with a single phrase, "We only stepped on France's tail." The message was unmistakable. Russia did not engineer Africa's awakening. It merely walked into a space that France itself had abandoned through broken promises and failed partnerships. The humiliation lay not in the accusation, but in the contrast. While Paris lamented information warfare, African capitals were busy signing deals for infrastructure, energy, and agriculture, redirecting value once extracted abroad into their own economies. The real battlefield was not in Ukraine, as Macron suggested, but in the deserts of Niger, the gold fields of Burkina Faso, and the streets of Bamako, where people demanded dignity over dependency. So, the question that echoes louder than Macron's accusations is this: will France finally confront its colonial past and adapt to Africa's new reality, or will it continue to blame outsiders for the crumbling of its empire? The curtain of illusion has finally been pulled back, and the truth is harsh. For decades, France positioned itself as the protector of Africa, guardian of peace, guarantor of stability. Yet today, that image lies in ruins. Across the Sahel, the evidence is undeniable. French bases are abandoned, its tricolor flag no longer flies over dusty garrisons, and its promises echo hollow in the ears of the people who once believed them. Paris did not simply lose influence, it lost trust, and trust once broken is the hardest currency to recover. Consider Niger. This country is home to some of the world's richest uranium deposits, a resource that powers nearly 70% of France's electricity. French households enjoy light and warmth because of Niger's soil, yet over 80% of Nigerians live in darkness, without reliable access to electricity. It is a paradox so glaring it burns the conscience. How can the land that fuels Paris live in perpetual blackout? The reality speaks louder than diplomacy. Exploitation dressed as partnership. Or take Burkina Faso. Gold flows out by the ton, nearly $3 billion in annual exports, but too many schools remain without proper roofs, without electricity, without clean water. Mothers send their children to class with hope, only to watch them study by candlelight. The awakening is not just political, it is moral. Across Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, citizens now recognize what had long been hidden behind diplomatic jargon. They see that foreign troops patrolling their streets did not bring safety, but instead symbolized dependency. The irony is cruel. The more soldiers arrived, the more insecurity grew. In Mali, the presence of 5,000 French troops coincided with a 40% rise in violent incidents. For the people of the Sahel, the conclusion was unavoidable. External protection had made the situation worse, not better. This awakening is reshaping the narrative of Africa. No longer is the continent portrayed merely as a warehouse of raw materials to be mined, shipped, and consumed abroad. Increasingly, Africa is asserting itself as a decision-maker, a protagonist in global affairs. The words of ordinary citizens echo the spirit of Thomas Sankara and Patrice Lumumba. Sovereignty is not given, it is claimed. And in this claiming, Africa is beginning to turn the wheel of history. But this moment is not without risk. As Paris retreats, other powers, Moscow, Beijing, Ankara, even Washington, are eager to step in. Will Africa exchange one master for another, or will it seize the rare opportunity to dictate the terms of engagement? Economic stakes are immense. Analysts estimate that by keeping just 30% of mineral value within Africa through refining and local industry, the continent could unlock over $150 billion in additional GDP annually. That is not just a statistic, it is the promise of millions of jobs, better schools, and stronger healthcare systems. The emotional weight of this awakening is profound. In villages once resigned to despair, young people now chant slogans of pride. In urban squares, rallies celebrate the expulsion of foreign troops as if a new independence has dawned. It is not simply about policy, it is about dignity. The harsh reality exposed the imbalance, but it also ignited the flame of resistance and hope. Still, the pressing question lingers. Can this awakening be sustained? History is littered with movements that began with fire only to end in ashes. To succeed, Africa must confront the ghosts of corruption, division, and external manipulation. Traore's words are a compass, but implementation demands discipline, transparency, and unity. And so, we arrive at the crossroads. France is no longer seen as the protector. The people of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali have declared that guardianship without justice is nothing but another mask for exploitation. The awakening has stripped away illusions, but it also demands responsibility. Will Africa transform its resources into lasting prosperity, or will it stumble into new forms of dependency? The world is watching. Investors track commodity prices, financial markets react to every policy shift, and headlines in Washington, Paris, and Moscow speculate on Africa's next move. But the real story is not written in stock exchanges, it is written in the faces of children in Niamey, students in Ouagadougou, and farmers in Gao. They are the true stakeholders in this awakening. The question is no longer whether Africa has awakened, the question is whether this awakening will endure long enough to rewrite history. And perhaps the most powerful question of all, is the West ready to accept Africa as an equal partner, or will it continue to resist a future it can no longer control? The Sahel is no longer just a region, it has become the beating heart of a continental rebellion. What began in Mali as defiance, spread to Burkina Faso as revolution, and reached Niger as a thunderclap, is now transforming into a synchronized chorus, "Down with France, long live Africa." This is not a mere slogan painted on banners. It is a collective cry of dignity echoing from Bamako to Ouagadougou, from Niamey to villages where the tricolor once flew above foreign barracks. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have done what once seemed unthinkable. They expelled French troops, closed foreign bases, and demanded new partnerships. In doing so, they struck at the heart of France's decades-old strategy of military presence mixed with economic extraction. With each expulsion order, Paris lost not just a foothold, but the myth of indispensability. Financial analysts in New York calculate that France's withdrawal risks billions in annual resource contracts, from Nigerian uranium to Malian cotton, sending ripples across European energy and commodity markets. The face of this defiance is strikingly youthful. Captain Ibrahim Traore, only in his 30s, has become the embodiment of a new generation, direct, unfiltered, unwilling to wrap sovereignty in the silk of diplomatic euphemism. His speeches are blunt, his actions swifter than his predecessors, and his message resonates with Africa's restless youth. The future will not be dictated from Paris, Brussels, or Washington, but from the red earth of the Sahel. This surge of confidence has not gone unnoticed. In Chad, citizens are beginning to question why their nation must continue in an old alignment when their neighbors have shown a different path. Demonstrations in N'Djamena, though smaller, carry the same pulse, chants that link sovereignty with survival. The ripple effect makes Paris nervous, not because of what has already happened, but because of what may come next if this domino chain continues. And so the Sahel Alliance is more than a military or political move, it is a cultural awakening. It represents not just resistance to neocolonialism, but also the birth of a regional identity rooted in self-reliance. Imagine for a moment the financial implications. If these three nations redirect even 25% of resource profits into local infrastructure, the region could unlock an additional $10 billion in annual growth, enough to fund new schools, roads, and hospitals for millions. The question that now hangs over this alliance is sharp. Will this momentum hold long enough to transform protest into policy and policy into prosperity? Or will outside powers attempt to fracture the unity before it reshapes the entire map of African sovereignty? The tremor that began in the Sahel is no longer contained within Africa's borders. It has reverberated into the grand chessboard of global politics. The fall of France's dominance in West Africa has forced every major power to reassess its next move. Washington, Moscow, Beijing, Ankara, and New Delhi all sense that something irreversible is unfolding. Africa is no longer a passive arena of competition, but an active player demanding respect. For the United States, the dilemma is sharp and uncomfortable. On one hand, policymakers in Washington see opportunity in France's retreat. If America steps in as a security guarantor, it could try to reshape Africa's alliances in its own image. Yet the warning signs are everywhere. If the U.S. repeats Paris's mistakes, military bases without real development, resource deals without fairness, it risks sharing the same fate. Already, in Niger and Burkina Faso, protesters wave signs that say, "We don't want another master." Financially, the stakes are high. Africa controls over 30% of the world's critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, and rare earths, essential for U.S. electric vehicle and semiconductor industries. Will Washington adapt to a world where contracts must serve Africans first, or will it cling to old habits of dominance? Meanwhile, Russia has seized the symbolic advantage. For Moscow, every French withdrawal is framed not as Russia's conquest, but as Paris's humiliation at the hands of Africans themselves. At the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, deals worth $13 billion were signed, covering everything from nuclear power to military training. Putin's statement was blunt. We do not replace one flag with another. We partner with sovereign nations. Whether rhetoric or reality, the message resonates deeply with African leaders tired of Western lectures. Could this explain why Traore is seen not only as a Burkinabe hero, but as a continental symbol of the youthful 60% of Africa's population demanding transformation? China, for its part, moves differently. While Russia amplifies symbolism, Beijing builds silently but relentlessly. In just the past decade, China financed over $120 billion in African infrastructure, railways in Kenya, ports in Djibouti, highways in Nigeria. Now, with France's collapse, Chinese companies are racing to secure contracts in uranium, gold, and especially green energy projects. In Namibia, China is co-financing solar plants linked to mining operations. In Mali, Beijing eyes lithium to fuel its EV dominance. But here too lies a question. Will China offer real partnership, or will it entrench a new kind of dependence dressed in the language of cooperation? Turkey and India are not standing idle either. Ankara has doubled its African embassies since 2009, and Turkish firms are building airports, mosques, and textile plants from Dakar to Mogadishu. India, driven by its hunger for uranium and oil, has intensified trade pacts with Niger and Tanzania. Together, these rising powers accelerate the trend toward a multipolar world, one where no single bloc, Western or Eastern, can monopolize Africa's destiny. And in the middle of this whirlwind stands Ibrahim Traore, not as a global superpower, not as a billionaire CEO, but as a young soldier turned leader who dares to say what many before him whispered, "Our resources must serve our people first." To the West, he is a disruptor. To Russia and China, he is an ally. To Africans, especially the millions under 25, he is a mirror of their aspirations. This is the paradox that makes today so volatile and so historic. The old order of dependency is cracking, but the new order has not yet solidified. Investors on Wall Street and the City of London track these shifts nervously, calculating how instability in Niger's uranium or Burkina Faso's gold could impact global supply chains. Yet beyond the numbers lies a truth harder to quantify, a generation that has chosen dignity over dependency. So the question for the world is clear. Will global powers finally engage Africa as an equal partner, or will they repeat the cycle of control that has already failed France? And for Africans themselves, the deeper challenge emerges. Can leaders like Traore translate defiance into durable institutions that secure both sovereignty and prosperity? The unraveling of Emmanuel Macron's influence did not begin in Paris, but in the dust of the Sahel. Each French expulsion from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger was not only a geopolitical setback, it was a personal humiliation for a president who once declared France the indispensable power in Africa. The loss of strategic footholds translated immediately into loss of prestige within Europe. Allies in Brussels whispered, if Paris cannot secure its backyard, how can it lead the continent? At home, the cracks widened. French citizens, already strained by inflation and energy costs, began questioning why billions of euros had been poured into overseas missions that delivered neither peace for Africans nor security for France. Opinion polls in 2024 showed confidence in Macron's foreign policy sinking below 30%, a dramatic fall for a leader who built his image on global statesmanship. The irony is sharp. The further Paris tried to control Africa, the less control it held over its own narrative. Meanwhile, a new image surged across Africa, not of Macron in polished suits at G7 summits, but of a young captain in fatigues addressing his people with raw clarity. Ibrahim Traore's speeches echoed in university halls, marketplaces, and even international media. To many Africans, he symbolized not just defiance against France, but a restoration of dignity. In financial terms, this shift is staggering. West Africa's collective resources, worth trillions of US dollars in gold, uranium, and oil, are no longer seen as assets of Paris, but as levers of African self-determination. How could Macron compete with that emotional and economic narrative? The symbolism deepens the humiliation. Each time Traore nationalized a mine, built a school, or electrified a village, he did more to shape France's downfall than any Kremlin strategy. Macron's insistence that Russia was poisoning African minds rang hollow when ordinary Africans could point to empty classrooms and dark homes as the true legacy of French presence. The paradox is undeniable. Macron, a leader who sought to modernize France's global role, now finds himself portrayed as the face of a fading empire. Across Africa, the conversation has shifted, no longer about Paris's promises, but about Africa's potential. And within France, citizens ask why their nation is clinging to a role that no longer commands respect. So the question lingers, is Macron's decline simply the story of one president's miscalculation, or is it the inevitable collapse of an entire system of influence built on dependency? The stage of history has shifted. Emmanuel Macron, once the youthful face of Europe's ambition, now stands as the symbol of a colonial chapter that has run its course. His speeches, once filled with confident promises, echo like relics of a bygone era. By contrast, Captain Ibrahim Traore embodies a voice that refuses to whisper, young, direct, unpolished, yet uncompromising. He does not speak the language of dependency, he speaks the language of dignity. His words cut sharply, we did not ask permission to be free, we stood up and claimed it. This contrast marks more than a rivalry between two men. It signals the passing of the torch from an old order to a new reality. For decades, Africa was described as the future that never arrived, a continent rich in $2 trillion worth of resources, yet trapped in poverty. Today, under leaders like Traore, the narrative is being rewritten. Gold once exported to Paris now funds schools in Ouagadougou. Uranium once powering French homes now raises the question, why do Niger's villages still sit in darkness while their soil glows with energy? The financial implications are immense. If even half of Africa's mineral wealth, valued in the trillions of US dollars, is redirected to local industry and social services, it could spark the rise of a middle class larger than Europe's within a generation. So, the question is not whether France has lost Africa, but whether Africa has finally found itself. Are we witnessing a fleeting protest or the dawn of a permanent new order? History rarely knocks twice, and tonight it is knocking on Africa's door with a force too loud to ignore. The winds that swept across the Sahel are no longer whispers of dissent, but declarations of sovereignty. For generations, the continent was told that dignity could be negotiated, that freedom had to be approved by signatures in foreign capitals. But as the voice of a young generation rises, the message is unmistakable. Dignity cannot be bargained, and freedom requires no permission slip. This is not merely geopolitics, it is a human story written in sacrifice, resilience, and vision. Across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Ordinary citizens have witnessed what the textbooks of old never told them, that sovereignty is not a theory, it is a lived practice. For every contract signed in Paris or Brussels, there are children in Ouagadougou or Niamey asking why their classrooms remain without light. For every billion-dollar mine extracted, there are mothers asking why the hospital nearest to them still lacks medicine. These are not abstract debates, but concrete realities, measured not in political speeches, but in the daily rhythm of life. President Macron's accusations, Russia's bold declarations, America's careful watch, all of these reveal a global chessboard in motion. Yet at its core, the heart of the story beats in Africa itself. Leaders like Ibrahim Traore remind the world that Africa is not a passive space on the map, but an active voice in shaping tomorrow. His declaration, "We did not ask permission to be free," is less about defiance and more about ownership. Ownership of destiny, of resources, of narratives too long written by others.